That was, of course, The Commitments with Mustang Sally, bringing us into our first chat today. And I'm jumping right in at the deep end here, I'll be honest. Very intriguing topic, multiculturalism. Now, I know what you're thinking. We've got 200 nationalities here in the UAE. We've got this nailed. But a new book suggests that in our very global workplaces, miscommunication is still pretty commonplace. And I want you to be honest here. Do you make assumptions about people based on their nationalities? I think probably to a degree we all do. Might not want to admit it, but this is a no judgment zone. Let me know. Do you think that you do that? 4001 on the text. We're going to be getting into essentially what this means for us in the workplace, especially here, and how we can perhaps avoid the pitfalls of stereotyping a bit. So to get into the topic, I'm joined in the studio by two experts. Emma Jordan's the CEO at Infinite Consulting, and Ing van Bell is a partner in executive search and assessment at Stanton Chase. Hello to both of you. Thank you for coming in. Emma, I'm coming to you first. Tell me what you mean by cultural stereotyping. How would we see it kind of present itself here in the UAE?
I think when we, put people in particular boxes and we say all of the people from this particular nationality are like this, and we then make assumptions is on their capability. Often when it's somebody that's not from our own culture, we might label them as incompetent when actually it's just a misunderstanding in terms of, they might be approaching something in the workplace in an entirely different way to us. And often we think our way is the right way, right? So when somebody tackles something in an entirely different way to us, we then think, okay, well, they obviously don't know what they're doing and they must be incompetent.
Is that something you would agree with, Ing? Is that kind of how you see it on your side of things when it comes to looking at people and sort of perhaps judging a bit based on their nationality?
Yes, I think stereotyping is only natural. It's also a cognitive tool for ourselves, and we use it very often to simplify and to process information quite fast and efficiently. So I think stereotyping, although it has a negative connotation, can also be a benefit for us. And why do we always think that stereotyping is something negative? It can also be something positive, like saying, okay, people that are from Switzerland are very timely, or Italian people are good in design, or Indians are good at maths. So it can also be something that we use in a positive way, and it can also help us to put people on the right place, of course, on the condition that we don't generalize, of course.
Yeah, I mean, for my own information, I guess my initial thought is culture the same as nationality? When we're like in this conversation, is all of the sort of cultural stereotyping that we see going on here, is it based on nationality or is it wider than that? Emma?
Yeah, I think so. Our cultural upbringing is what typically determines the way that we behave, and obviously that then impacts the way that we are in the workplace. So your nationality will ultimately have a huge impact on that. Having said that, though, the way that we're brought up as a child can then be further influenced by the experiences that we have in our adult life, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that we would naturally conform to the cultural upbringing that we were exposed to. We may then later in life determine what are the cultural values that we're going to hold dear to.
And so where do those values come from, would you say? What should we be aware of when we're trying to consider that?
So we're not born with culture. It's something that's taught to us either through our parents or our wider family, or even our schooling and our education. All of the things that we're exposed to as we're growing up. So I think that's what determines our culture. But as I said, later in life, we can then say, okay, well, based on having moved from my own country to another country like the UAE, I'm now having a much broader perspective and recognise that I actually align more to, another type of view on something and on a topic, and therefore I'm kind of falling a little bit away from my, my national cultural values, if you like.
So, Ing, when it comes to recruiting and the workplace side of things, yes, how would we see this play out? Where do these kind of cultural influences come into the workforce?
Yeah, so national culture, just as Emma just said, is something that has been programmed. And of course, when we recruit, it is a useful tool, but at the same time, something that we really have to watch out for. But when we look at culture, we always say it's some kind of it's a group phenomenon, and we use it. We use the word culture to analyze behavior of people, and also sometimes to predict behavior of people. So national culture does come in when we recruit, and in some countries outside of this region it would be not, let's say, very proper to say so, but we do use it here, especially when we look at leaders, because of course if you look at a leader is defined by many other things too. Of course, first of all, by his or her competences, also by his or her behavior, leadership behavior, but culture for us, especially at my company, Stanton Chase, is a very useful tool, not to judge, but mainly to see if that person can actually fit into the culture of the organization. So there's a clear distinction between a national culture and organizational culture. And of course, you are always let's say, impregnated with your own national culture, but that doesn't mean that you are not adaptable. So what we do is, even though you've got your imprints, we really look at how adaptable is this leader for this organization. And very often so, to see if it works, if there's a match, it is because there is a cultural match between both parties, between the employer and the employee.
Oh, very interesting. We're going to be getting into that leadership topic next. And please do keep your messages coming. 4001. Emma and Inge are staying with me in the studio. Next up.
More of Afternoons with Helen Farmer is coming up next.
On the UAE's #1 talk radio station, Dubai Eye 103.
Welcome back. It is 2:20. I am Jan Crichton in for Helen Farmer today. And we're talking multiculturalism, particularly in the workplace. It's a tricky topic. I mean, I think we're all familiar with it. We've got 200 nationalities here in the UAE. We're certainly all used to dealing with people from all over the world. But are we dealing with it well, is the question. Now, before the break, we were hearing from Ing van Bell, who's a partner in executive search and assessment at Stanton Chase, and she was talking about leadership. She's still here with me in the studio, as is Emma Jordan, who is the CEO at Infinite Consulting. And we were just talking during the break about that leadership issue. Emma, how does our kind of cultural upbringing and background influence how we lead? Is it something that we need to be aware of working in such a global environment as we are here?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does need to be something that we're aware of. Our cultural background can determine, how hierarchical we are, how we perceive time, how do we build relationships, how do, even things like the way that we negotiate in a sales capacity. So it influences absolutely every aspect of our life. And so you may have a leader from one culture that would lead in one way and a leader from another culture that would lead in an entirely different way. Often we've assumed that perhaps it's just their personality, when actually it's deeper ingrained. It's to do with their cultural upbringing that's determined the way that they might behave in the workplace.
That's really interesting. So are some kind of cultures less hierarchical than others then? And do we bring that with us into the workplace?
Yeah, so some cultures would be more hierarchical. So there would be an expectation that, you respect the senior person, what they says go, decisions are made top down, and you wouldn't necessarily want to kind of share your ideas or kind of share any level of initiative with the leader, because it would be potentially seen as calling into question their leadership style or their authority. Whereas other cultures, more flatter cultures, quite appreciate the collaboration of the team. We'll all sit around a table and we'll discuss our ideas. And then, yes, the leader will still make the overall decision, but we've together made that decision as a group. And when you're working with people that are at the opposite end of the scale to yourself, then you'll probably notice quite a big difference.
Inga, how does that play into when it comes to building teams? Because I assume there's no right or wrong way, but there's a right or wrong fit, perhaps.
Yes, indeed. And as Emma pointed out, it's really about awareness and about communication. And if we have conflicts or misunderstandings in the workplace, it's mainly because of that, because of the expectations of a team leader, of the team. They expect to get clear directions and clear guidelines, whereas the leader thinks, oh, I'm just giving them the freedom because I want to empower them. And this is where a lot of misunderstandings start to exist. Now, a way to actually help that is by just training people and raising that cultural awareness. And of course, there's some very nice coaches, like, for example, Emma, who can help you with that. So it's awareness, it's training, and this is when we recruit leaders. Almost every organization here in the UAE asks us, like, please bring a leader in, whatever personality, whatever nationality, but a leader that knows how it works in this region, because this region is different compared to others.
And I mean, in what way is this region different? Would you say that there's a kind of norm in this region in the way that we expect to see people lead?
Well, Dubai is an international, it's a global business hub. We have so many nationalities working together. So a norm, I would not say that there's a norm. Also, there's so many different organization cultures. But what we do see is that actually you need to have that leadership experience to be an inclusive leader. Otherwise, you will never be able to stick around and be successful.
And so, Emma, what does inclusive leadership look like here? How would you go about training somebody to be more inclusive in their leadership style?
So for me, the very first step is to do an exercise of introspection. So that would be a cultural intelligence assessment where the leader is then able to better understand their own cultural values, because often we don't understand what it is that's driving our behaviour. So once you understand that better, you can then start to see the similarities and the differences between yourself and your colleagues, and then start to think about how can you put strategies in place in order that those interactions with your colleagues are more effective, because you recognise that there are challenges that you're going to face because you'll tackle something in an entirely different way to one another.
I think it's so interesting. Like, my husband here is managing teams in 3 different countries. And he was saying at the beginning, the biggest adjustment was trying to get some of the staff to speak up in meetings and others to kind of leave room for those people to speak up. And I guess in that way, it's not even just about culture. It's a lot of the time it's about character, right? It's some people will always feel more confident in stepping forward and others might be more confident in the background just following. Is it about encouraging people to be themselves, or is it about kind of teasing out the areas where people might be stepping back themselves?
So I think there is an element of character or personality that determines whether somebody's going to speak up or not. You know, are they extroverted or introverted? But on a deeper level, in terms of culture, people that come from hierarchical cultures are less likely to speak up unless they're kind of invited to do so. And then also, as long as they feel confident that what they say isn't going to be potentially used against them. Whereas other cultures will feel completely confident to share their views. And that's where you get that whole, some people kind of take over the meeting, and others will just almost sit in silent. I suppose the issue then comes when it's assumed that those that have been silent were kind of shy and more reserved and had nothing to say, when in actual fact they may have a lot to say, but they just don't necessarily know that it's appropriate to share their views and their input.
Fascinating stuff. We're going to be staying with this topic and I'm going to be coming to your messages next. Please get your messages in. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and how it plays out in your own workplace. But first up, this is Uptown Funk, Mark Ronson.
This is that ice cold Michelle fight for that white gold. This one for them hood girls, them good girls, straight masterpieces. Styling.
Afternoons on Dubai Eye 103.8.
Hello. Welcome back to Afternoons. I'm Jen Crichton. I'm standing in for Helen this week. And we're talking multiculturalism at work right now. And just because we've got 200 nationalities here in the UAE doesn't mean that we've all got it nailed and we don't need to learn anything more. Keep your messages coming on this. It's really interesting. Someone has messaged in. They've not put their name on this actually, but they said different nationalities here are a constant eye-opener. My own most bewildering thing thing is the fact that while I will try and join conversations, there are others who, when you walk past and you're having a conversation, will duck their heads. Are they expecting a sniper? It's interesting. I wonder if that's a shyness thing. I would kind of be inclined to sort of join a conversation as well, but I understand that kind of temptation to sort of offer people privacy, I guess, if they're walking past you having a conversation. I'm not sure if that's a cultural thing or if that's a personality thing, but I guess it kind of touches on what, Inga, you were saying before the break, is that we have these kind of cultural differences, we have our own personality differences. You made a really interesting point just before we went into the break there, which was actually a lot of these differences are something we should be building on and celebrating rather than trying to smooth out. Where can those differences be positive, and what degree of friction is good?
Indeed, for me personally, I'm always looking at organizations, and I'm sometimes really surprised to see how civil everyone is with each other. We are all afraid to make any faux pas because we are all respectful to each other. But being respectful is not how you make a breakthrough team. If you really want to spark innovation, you will have to have some kind of friction. And of course, it's up to your specific team, your specific organization, how much friction and how much innovation you can allow, and depending on your industry too. So for me, especially when I look at the workspace here in Dubai or in the UAE in general, I also see that, let's say 10, 15 years ago, we looked at it from an expat point of view. Well, this is just a temporary stop. It's a transient market. So we're not going to invest too much into employee relations with our colleagues. But really, when we look now, people are staying for longer, and it's much more sustainable in terms of people. So now we're much more investing in that kind of team dynamics. And this is something, if we really want to have those good team dynamics, then we will have to have these open and honest conversations with each other, whether we like it or not.
And so what level of friction is, I guess, healthy in a team? Where is that a positive, and where does it cross the line into, okay, we've maybe got a bit of an issue here?
It's a very difficult question, Jennifer, because it really depends on the specific culture in your organization. So then we would have to go back to the organizational culture. What kind of organization do you want to be? Do you want to be an innovative organization, or do you want to be more traditional? There's no judgment there. We only say, like, okay, make sure whatever culture or you have, just make sure that it's very clear. We always say, like, your vibe attracts your tribe. So the more specific you are about your culture, the easier it will become for you to attract the right employees and the right team members. And then you will have that team dynamics, and it should be something that is quite natural and fluid too. And it's the task of the leader to navigate through that.
I love that phrase, your vibe attracts your tribe. I wonder though, this is maybe a bit of a controversial one, but you hear a lot of people saying to get ahead in the UAE, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Is there an element in this where we kind of build teams in our own image, where we look for people that think like us and end up getting a bit siloed? Emma, is that a risk here?
I mean, so firstly, I would agree that yes, in this region, it's not what you know, it's who you know. But I would argue that that's to do with, again, culture. Probably about 70% of the population here come from cultures that are typically more relationship orientated, which would mean that the focus would be on that building that human connection with the other person in order you can decide, do I like them, and therefore do I want to do business with them, or do I want to refer their CV to my employer. But I mean, yes, there is an element of which you end up being surrounded by people like yourself. For me, one of the things that I try to strive to do is look at, who am I surrounded by? Who am I regularly talking to? Do they look like me? Do they sound like me? And try and make sure that that's a broad spectrum of people, so that I've got a broad perspective of different culture, and not always just looking at things from my own perspective, and having my mind open to different ways of doing things. It doesn't mean, as Inga was saying, it doesn't mean that there won't be those levels of as friction, because nobody likes being told that their way is not the right way, right? but recognizing that friction, that friction will be there because we do approach things differently from a cultural perspective. But then thinking about what are the strategies that we can put in place in order that we're more effective when we are tackling things in entirely different ways, so that the job can still get done and so that everybody within the organisation still feels valued and heard.
Sorry, carry on.
I think for me, it's just about how can we show more grace to one another. As an example, now one of the things that I witness is that when I'm delivering training, I can have a multitude of different nationalities attending the training course, and there'll be different people arriving at different times, and that will be to do with the perspective people have around the value of time. And in the past, because I come from a culture that's typically more punctual, when people arrived late, I definitely didn't have so much grace, and I just thought, gosh, you don't value my time, and but actually, when you start to recognise the cultural value differences, and you say, oh, okay, some people just see time in a much more fluid way, and they're much more flexible with their time. It doesn't need to be so structured, and so if I arrive 5 or 10 minutes later to a meeting or a training course, it isn't an issue. I then, as the trainer, go, oh yeah, okay, that's all right now.
Gosh, that's a really interesting one, because I think I've been a bit like that. I've been a bit kind of judgmental, I guess, of lateness, but I feel like I've been sort of forced to learn to accept it in myself as well here, because we spend quite a bit of time stuck in traffic, and I find that even with the best will, I'm later here more often than I might be at home, and kind of having to make your peace with that. But I've never really thought of it as being a cultural thing. It's very interesting. I mean, going back to what you were saying about trying not to be surrounded by people who look and sound like you. I mean, Inga, when it comes to building teams, is that a key thing that you should be looking at? Going, where do we have gaps in terms of our diversity in the team, and should we be looking to fill those?
Yes, absolutely. For me, I mean, it's a human reflex to, especially when you're recruiting as a leader, that you look for people who think like you, who are you have a personality that's close to you. It's a general truth. It's not just here in the region. But here there's an extra layer, of course, because we tend to look at people with a similar background as ourselves. And actually, there's nothing wrong with that, because you think of the success of your organization. So you look at what person would help us reach that success. Oh, it would be somebody who thinks like us, who can speaks the same language, literally or by figure of speech, and so we can actually achieve success on a short-term basis. But of course, we have to look at the long-term basis. And if we just look at diversity and skills, then we, as a good leader, you always look for people who are actually smarter than yourself, at least in one or two areas. And this is actually what you should be looking for. So it's not just about the background, it's also about the skills. And this is what I think a fantastic leader would do. And diversity is a huge element, a crucial element in that.
We're going to be getting into that and how we can recognise when we're stereotyping as well next. But first up, Milani has got her eye on the maps. Let's take a look at the traffic.
Dubai Eye 103.8 traffic.
With Yas Island Abu Dhabi. Stay at iconic hotels and play at record-breaking theme parks. Book now.
3.8.
Hello and welcome back to Afternoons without Helen Farmer. Today it's me, Jen Crichton. I'm in the hot seat for Helen this week, and we're talking multiculturalism at work right now, the benefits and the pitfalls of having the brilliantly global teams that we tend to have here in the UAE. I'm still joined by two experts on the topic. Emma Jordan is the CEO at Infinite Consulting, and Inga Van Bell is a partner in executive search and assessment at Stanton Chase. And you are currently, Inga, writing a book in this kind of region of expertise and talking about particularly employee engagement. And we've been talking quite a bit about leadership in this chat. But what does it mean for employee engagement? How do we bring employees into this conversation around diversity?
It's called Employee Engagement. What else? Because we want to bring best practices from marketing into the internal organization. So when we look at employee engagement, we've identified 12 drivers or killers of engagement. Leadership is actually the most important one, and it's quite universal. But quite recently, like in the past 5 to 10 years, diversity and inclusion is one of the drivers of engagement too. And there are some recent studies that show that the higher the diversity in your organization, the more chances that your organization is also super engaged.
Wow.
Yes, so that's good news, actually. So this means that here in Dubai, with all these diverse organizations, we can actually have a very high engagement level. It's also something, I think it's a unique opportunity for this region to lead the way and show the world how it's done.
And so what does really good employee engagement look like?
Good employee engagement is when people feel emotionally, physically, and really attached to their employer. So employee engagement is not the same as job satisfaction, and it's also not the same as well-being at work, because a lot of people think, oh, I'm happy at work and I'm actually quite satisfied with my job. That doesn't mean that they're engaged. There's enough examples of people who take it very easy and who think that they're at the Club Mediterranee when they go to work, but that's not really, it's not because you have a pool table at work that you're engaged. Engaged is much more than that.
Do you think there's an easy mistaking those two things? Do you think too many companies perhaps think that because they've got a pool table in the lobby and their staff look like they're having fun, that they have engaged employees?
Absolutely. It's one of my things, right? I really tell a lot of organizations how to increase that engagement, and employees that are being heard, employees that are being challenged, where they also have a safe environment and where employees can really learn and develop themselves. These are very important parameters of an engaged organization. And then, of course, there's the purpose and values. As long as employees feel that they're part of something that is bigger than themselves, then you've got a pretty good chance that they are engaged.
And Emma, when you go into companies to work with them, to consult with them, is that something that a lot of companies appreciate? Do you think that they see the benefit in having genuinely, truly engaged employees?
I think they understand that it's important. I don't think they necessarily appreciate always how much it can impact the bottom line. If you think about cultural intelligence, if you want to have a culturally inclusive workforce or workplace, so that everybody's engaged, you need to make sure that you've got the right strategies in place. But once you have those strategies in place and that you have then an engaged workforce, you can definitely see the benefits. You'll have a much more productive workforce, and therefore you'll see a much better return on investment.
Now, we've had a couple of messages in. One person says, if timeliness can be explained by culture, then every Glaswegian could be excused for showing up late to an interview, besmirching the Glaswegians there. I'm glad I'm from Edinburgh. This cultural debate topic, says someone else, goes well beyond the workplace. Even the medical profession here in the UAE sometimes makes decisions and assumptions based on their perceived ideas of people. I think cultural awareness training is needed in a lot of sectors. That is another topic that I suspect we could probably talk about for hours, because I think it is. I mean, cultural awareness training, Emma, does it work? Or we need to go a bit deeper than that?
I think cultural awareness training helps people to be aware of a particular culture. That doesn't necessarily mean you're intelligent about that culture. And cultural intelligence takes it that one step further, where you think about, how am I going to put strategies in place that makes me more effective when I'm working with other people? So for me, cultural intelligence is the way forward. And
if people want to find out more about what you do, Emma, where can they find you?
So the website is infiniteconsultingme.com, but I'm also on LinkedIn, Emma Jordan with a double A.
And Inga, when is that book coming out? When can I get my hands on it?
Okay, so I promised myself that I'm not going to jump on a plane as long as my book is not finished. So my children are going away for vacation. My husband is already gone, but I'm still stuck here. So I'm putting some pressure on myself. But I think during the summer it will be finished. So I'll certainly invite you over for the book launch.
Can't wait. Inga van Belle there, partner in executive search and assessment at Stanton Chase and soon to be author, and Emma Jordan, the CEO at Infinite Consulting, bringing us up almost to the news. But first up, here's Texas with Say What You Want. Enjoy.